Can you imagine someone who once rose to fame as a symbol of love and hope, but within just a few years their name became tied to a movement that broke centuries of silence, rewrote the culture of a sacred institution, and awakened voices that had long been ignored? This isn't just a story about one man in a white cassock. It is a mirror reflecting how one person can shift the conscience of an entire world. When Jorge Mario Bergoglio stepped out onto the Vatican balcony in March 2013, the world didn't know what to expect from the first Jesuit pope, the first Latin American pope, and the first pope to choose the name Francis, honoring St. Francis of Assisi, the patron of the poor and the humble. His shy smile and simple greeting of Buona sera spoke volumes more than any grand speech could. In that moment, the Catholic Church had turned a page, and the world was about to feel its impact. Pope Francis didn't just bring change to the Vatican. He broke the glass walls that had kept the Church distant from the people. He moved into a modest guest house instead of the apostolic palace. He washed the feet of prisoners and Muslims. He hugged the disfigured and kissed the hands of the sick. He didn't just speak about the poor. He lived among them and walked their streets, and that simplicity shook the power structures of the world. Born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, to Italian immigrant parents, young Jorge grew up on the gritty sidewalks of a working-class neighborhood. His experiences with the poor shaped his theology of mercy, not judgment, and his lifelong commitment to social justice stood in stark contrast to the image many held of a distant, cold Vatican with a degree in chemistry and a heart for the people. He became a priest, known not for privilege, but for riding the bus, visiting slums, and cooking his own meals. As Pope Francis, he brought that same humility to St. Peter's Basilica, and his every move since has echoed a call to return to the gospel's roots. He made the Church feel human again by daring to say the Church should not be a museum of saints, but a hospital for sinners. He told priests to get out of the churches and go into the streets, reminding them their mission was not control, but compassion, not rules, but reconciliation, not exclusion, but embrace. For many it was a breath of fresh air, for others it was a storm. This new pope challenged the very identity of the Church by refusing the extravagance of previous popes and instead calling out the Church's own sins. When scandals of sexual abuse threatened to tear apart the moral foundation of the institution, Francis did what few dared. He apologized openly, he met survivors, he condemned cover-ups and demanded accountability. He faced criticism from within and without, but never backed down from holding the Church to its mission of truth and healing. In doing so, he not only rebuilt trust with millions of disillusioned followers, but also inspired other global institutions to re-examine their own failures. His papacy extended far beyond religion, speaking directly into the politics of climate change, immigration, and economic injustice. In 2015, he released Laudato Si, a groundbreaking encyclical calling climate change a moral issue and demanding action from governments, corporations, and everyday people. He told world leaders that the Earth was our common home and warned of the consequences of greed and indifference. Suddenly, climate scientists and environmentalists were quoting the Pope not just because of his title, but because of the power of his message. When Francis visited the United States, he didn't just address Congress. He addressed hearts. He spoke of Martin Luther King Jr., Abraham Lincoln, and Dorothy Day. He reminded politicians of their duty to protect the vulnerable, the immigrant, the elderly, and the forgotten. He visited prisoners, homeless shelters, and inner-city schools, rather than banquets and political fundraisers. Each appearance was a sermon without words, a sermon of presence, of compassion, and of moral clarity. Perhaps what made Francis most revolutionary was his refusal to be an untouchable icon. He laughed, he stumbled, he admitted mistakes, he embraced atheists, welcomed LGBTQ individuals, and told priests to focus less on doctrine and more on mercy. He declared that the Church is not a toll booth, but a field hospital for the wounded. That message broke barriers and welcomed back millions who had long felt abandoned, judged, or unworthy. His effect was not measured in dogmas altered or doctrines changed, but in hearts healed, walls broken, and bridges built. But not everyone welcomed the Francis effect. With change came resistance. Within the Vatican walls, many traditionalists saw his actions as dangerous, even heretical. He was criticized for being too political, too lenient, too unorthodox. There were cardinals who openly challenged him, documents leaked, strategies plotted. Some accused him of diluting doctrine, of creating confusion, yet Francis never retaliated with force or silence. Instead, he doubled down on dialogue, saying we must build bridges, not walls. He encouraged open debate, transparency, and even disagreement, believing that only through honest conversation could real reform emerge. This courage to face internal division while continuing to walk the path of transformation became one of his most defining characteristics. The world watched as this aging man in white stood alone at St. Peter's Square during the pandemic rain pouring down streets empty. He raised the Eucharist not to a crowd, but to the world watching from behind screens. It was more than a ritual. It was a cry for hope, for healing, for faith that could endure even in isolation. His lonely vigil became one of the most iconic moments of the COVID-19 era, a symbol of shared grief and unity at a time of global suffering. And it was not just Catholics who listened. Muslims, Jews, Hindus, atheists, and skeptics found something in Francis that transcended belief systems. They saw a man who practiced what he preached, who wasn't obsessed with power, prestige, or position, but with lifting others up. His influence reached beyond pulpits into classrooms, boardrooms, newsrooms, and parliaments. The Francis effect inspired countless acts of kindness, sparked community projects, ignited interfaith dialogues, and brought a new generation into conversations about ethics, justice, and dignity. He reminded us that leadership could be soft, yet strong, humble, yet firm. And that compassion was not a weakness, but the greatest strength of all. As years passed and his health began to decline, speculation grew about the future of the Church and the legacy he would leave. Some asked if his changes would survive, if the next pope would carry his torch. But others knew the truth. The Francis effect was not just a moment, it was a movement. It was never about one man. But the idea that even in the most ancient of institutions, a heart full of compassion could bring light to the darkest corners. His life had proven that a shepherd could smell like his sheep, that a leader could walk behind to let others lead, and that holiness could be found in simplicity and sincerity. More than anything, Pope Francis showed us that change doesn't begin in laws or titles, but in the willingness to listen, to cry, to embrace, and to walk beside the broken one. Quiet Man from Argentina changed the tone of a 2,000-year-old institution, and by doing so helped change the tone of the world. This is not just a story of a pope, it is a story of what happens when mercy becomes louder than judgment, when love outshines authority, and when hope dares to take center stage. The Francis effect is still unfolding, not in headlines, but in homes, not in cathedrals, but in conversations, not in doctrine, but in the daily choices people make to be kinder, more, just more human. One pope changed the world, not because he had to, but because he believed that we all could too.